Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Good morning. This is Eric Williams. I'm the Director of Provider Development at DBHTS. It's good to be with you. I was asked to cover basically two topics today. So I want to provide a brief overview of updates to the ISP 3.3 that is scheduled for release in WaMS in May. So the second thing I want to talk about is really the relationship between the risk awareness tool, also called the RAT, and the ISP itself. So we've worked with the Office of Integrated Health and with WaMS to kind of clarify how the RAT informs the ISP, how you use it to identify and address risk, and then include that information into the supports and the planning process. I'll spend less time on the brief overview of the ISP and more time on the RAT. So let's go ahead to the next slide, and I'll provide you an introduction to our office. So we have community resource consultants located in every region of the state, and we've organized ourselves into three teams. So we have the individual team, the provider team, and the system team. The individual team is who you contact if you have questions about the HCBS settings regulations, if you have situations that involve an individual, so crisis situations, constituent concerns, that type of information, as well as the regional support team process. If you're a provider and you have questions about waiver services or about the ISP, you would contact your provider team contact. If you're a support coordinator and you're concerned with systems issues, policy regulation, you would contact the systems team. We do have a couple of roles that are carved out. We have Ashley Painter, she's our statewide regional support team coordinator. Sarah Thompson is our new statewide supported decision-making lead, and then we have recently added Stephanie Subetti, who is the employment specialist, so we'll get this updated out to folks as soon as possible. So on the next slide, we'll go ahead and provide a summary of the updates to the ISP version 3.3. One of the first significant changes was we increased the character limits wherever possible. So the standard was 3,000 characters per text box, and we have doubled that to 6,000 wherever we could without disrupting the user interface. So many fields are now increased to 6,000 characters. The rest of the changes take place in Part 2, Essential Information, and Part 5, Plan for Supports. So we added a few elements for supported decision-making, which will be introduced in the next month or two through training sessions. We've removed 4 medical elements and added 7. We restructured the employment and community integration section so that there are more discrete elements and the ability to provide responses for individual topics related to those conversations around employment and community integration. In Part 5, we had received multiple requests from providers to incorporate support instructions into the WaMS ISP, so we've made that adjustment, and then also added space for a backup plan for required services. So you go on to the next slide. So this is what the view looks like for supported decision-making. It's just a simple question about whether or not the person has a supported decision-making agreement. If yes, the date of the agreement, and then the types of decisions that are supported under that agreement. Again, we expect that there will be training in the next month or two related to this process, and so stay tuned. More information will be coming about this. All right, this is the physical and health condition section in the essential information. We added 7 elements that you see here. There is a couple of questions there at the top that relate to current diagnoses, current medical conditions or health protocols, and the rest of the elements relate to history. So if there's a past history of medical conditions, hospitalizations, surgeries, mental health conditions, or psychiatric hospitalizations, this is where that information would live and be kept. I think previous version of the ISP did not have as much of a thorough look at the person's history. So we've added these to enhance the content of the plan. Right, on the next slide, when you select one of those areas, such as current medical conditions or health protocols, etc., there's going to be a space there to list the medical conditions or list the protocols. So you really just want to think in terms of a bulleted list that describes each of those conditions, protocols, or hospitalizations, etc. All right. On the next slide, for those discrete elements around employment and integrated community involvement discussions, if you mark yes, that the conversation included a particular topic, there will be a box that will open up and provide space for providing some narrative related to that specific topic. This was done to ensure that the conversations are meaningful and do include all of the topics that are listed, that are appropriate. All right. Next slide. So now the bulk of our presentation today is focusing on this section, which is the risk awareness tool. So this tool is completed by the support coordinator annually. It identifies health risks that are related to mortality for people with DD that were identified in the last 12 months. And then it supplements the existing information in part 2, which is what we just talked about, those new 7 elements. So things that are popping up during the course of the ISP year in the past 12 months get identified through the risk awareness tool, or RAT, and then added to the essential information. So in that way, it's supplemental. It helps inform the essential information, which in turn informs planning. The tool does something else, though. It also identifies potential health risks. And these are things that based on the assessment, we suspect, based on that review, but we're not sure if that risk or health condition is true. So generally there's a referral that occurs to a qualified professional who confirms the diagnosis related to that particular issue, which in turn makes its way into the plan. Typically that's a team discussion. The support coordinator typically writes parts 1 through 4, as you may know. But it is sort of a team process, and then the providers would add information to their part 5 once things are confirmed. So on the next slide, we'll look at the fact that the risk awareness tool looks at risk in 11 key areas, and it does have a summary page, which is uploaded into WaMS. So that's the content of the RAT. On the next page, you're going to see one of the elements. The tool proceeds in a step-by-step process. Generally, step 1 of each of the diagnoses or potential diagnoses highlighted here in yellow looks for whether or not a person has received a diagnosis for that condition in the last 12 months. So if you have a yes in this box, it's going to show up as confirmed on the summary page, and there's going to be an expectation that that need is addressed in the ISP. There should be an outcome, related supports, and instructions for that particular need. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that the lower half, the additional steps, steps 2 and 3, speak more on the potential for a risk. Yeah, go ahead to the next slide. Speak to a potential risk. So in general, potential risks, you want to ensure that they are confirmed by a qualified professional before you start to stand up outcomes and formal supports for them. There is a possibility that a person could decline a referral to a healthcare professional when you're looking at a potential risk, and in that case, the tool is going to ask the team if the individual has a plan in place that currently kind of mitigates that risk, and if it doesn't, the team should really work and discuss ways to ensure the person's health and safety under current services when they decline that referral. So either the plan addresses it, or the team is going to have some discussion about what we need to put in place to help the person be healthy and safe. Okay, so on the next slide. This is a summary page. Again, the yellow highlighting is related to new diagnoses or new concerns. So anything indicated with a check mark here on the summary page is expected to be addressed in the ISP. Typically, these needs would have supports related to them. You'd want to track and monitor and include them in your quarterly report. So there would be an outcome or outcomes that encompass these particular needs. In this example, pressure injury is identified as a new diagnosis, so you know that that's going to need to be addressed in the ISP. All right, on the next slide, you're going to see here those 7 elements again. So any new or existing diagnoses or health concern has to go into the ISP, and this is a section that you would use to add that information. You always want to remember that the supports that are developed for that need are specific to each individual rather than applied across everyone in the setting, right? So this is a person-centered plan. Supports are based on the person's needs. So on the next slide, you'll see an example of where you would put pressure injury if it was identified on the rat. So here, are there current health protocols? If yes, list. There could be needs already listed there from the person's history, and you would add that newly identified need to this section as well. So go ahead to the next slide, and there'll be an example of how that actually is done. So for this individual, you'll notice that current medical conditions include osteoporosis, epilepsy, hypertension, high cholesterol, and now pressure injury, because that was identified on the risk awareness tool. So this is what it looks like populated in WaMS directly. You see the list of medical conditions first. You see the list of health protocols. There are 2. You see a history of surgeries. And then you'll notice down at the bottom there are special diet or nutritional needs, which is a low-salt DASH diet. Go on to the next slide. And you may be familiar, if you're familiar with the ISP, you're familiar with this section. So this is what we had prior to having these new 7 elements. And basically it's a space that is used in an ISP to describe current related support needs for those health and behavioral conditions. And the idea is that you describe the support needs in this section, and then this section is used to help inform outcome development and plan development going forward. So in this example, you see gentle touch due to osteoporosis with routine repositioning to prevent pressure injury, seizure protocol to manage safety before, during, and after seizures, low-salt DASH diet to address hypertension and high cholesterol. So in bold there at the bottom, you'll see how those supports are speaking to that person's health conditions. Okay, on the next slide. This is what it looks like once it's developed with the team during the annual plan meeting. These are 3 outcomes that encompass those same support needs. So Mia follows her nutritional plan so that she has stable blood pressure and lowered cholesterol. Mia follows her seizure protocol in order to be safe before, during, and after seizures. And then Mia participates in her repositioning protocol so that she does not have injury due to osteoporosis or pressure sores. Following through the process, you'll see the different supports listed and the services that will provide those supports, those key steps that will help the person get to a positive result. All right, so on the next slide, this is the part 5. So you'll notice that one of the new elements that you'll see here is how to support, which is that space for the support instructions that we did not have previously. You'll notice that the outcome here is Mia follows her nutritional plan so that she has stable blood pressure, lowered cholesterol, and I apologize, swallows safely. We ended up modifying this example, so don't worry about that one. That's a typo. But Mia goes grocery shopping weekly. So Mia can identify 3 preferred food items that fit within her diet once a week for 6 weeks. What do you record? Yes or no to indicate if 3 items were selected by Mia. It is skill building, and she's making food selections. She's doing this on a weekly basis. We have a target date, and then we have the instructions there at the bottom on how staff support her with that. So that sort of encompasses one of the support activities related to her outcome for following her nutritional plan. All right, so on the next slide. Next, we're going to move into not the identified risks or the known risks, but the potential risks. And these are things that would need to be confirmed by a qualified professional. So let's go ahead to the next slide. And on that summary page, if we move over to the next column, you'll see that potential risk identified here in orange are those things that we suspect or we think based on the completion of the rat might be true. And we would want to work with the person to identify a healthcare professional that they can visit and get a consultation and have that be confirmed so that it can be planned for. You would handle a little bit differently if the person declines to go to a doctor for something that you suspect. And so we'll talk about that in a moment. All right, so on the next slide. So once potential risks are confirmed, so the person goes ahead and says, yes, I want to go to my doctor and be assessed for this. And so once the healthcare professional confirms that that diagnosis is true or that those risks are true, then the support coordinator and the team would complete a progress note. They would update the essential information, and add outcomes and supports as needed to address that new diagnosis and those new risks. Referrals should be as soon as possible, and all efforts, plans, and delays that are encountered in the referral process should be documented. So always make sure that you're telling the story from the time that a need is identified, a potential need is identified on the RAT, to the person gets the consultation, to the time you add it to the plan. So if there anything is delaying that process, make sure you document that. All right. Now, we're going to talk about when consultation is declined. So if a person says, you know, I hear you, I understand that you think that I might be at risk for something, but I don't want to see a doctor. So you want to make sure as a team that you are ensuring that health and safety is currently met by the supports that are being provided. And if it is not, then with the person's agreement, you need to update supports to mitigate the risk to the extent possible. So that might be changing the support instructions in the throughout the day section of the Part 5, which will be added to the new 3.3 ISP. There's a space in the Part 5 that enables you to write instructions for supports that are consistent across services and across settings. You could add it there. You could add it under existing instructions for established support activities, or you might add some support activities under the routine health and safety life area. The idea, though, is that the person agrees to those changes. So, for example, if someone you notice has been maybe shuffling their feet more or demonstrating some concerns with balance, and you're concerned about a falls risk, you know, something that you might do within the scope of your practice is remove area rugs to kind of help mitigate that risk of falling. Well, you want to talk to the person and say, you know, this is something that we can do to help you be safe and reduce the risk of you having a fall. And so if that is something that you put in place, you would make sure and document that in the person's plan and make sure that that support is provided going forward. What you don't want to do as a provider is include risk mitigation that must be ordered by a qualified medical professional unless an order has been written. So if you're concerned with someone having trouble swallowing, you would not take it upon yourself to place that person on a puree diet, right? You would want the person to be evaluated by a healthcare professional in order to make that sort of decision. If you have any questions about what sorts of things are clinical and which sorts of things aren't, you can always reach out to the Office of Integrated Health and talk to one of the nurses to help get clarification on that. You also want to include any monitoring or any emergency response steps that will be taken in the ISP. So if what you've put in place to mitigate the concerns looks like it's not working, you might need to take some emergency response steps, pull the team back together, and re-look at how you are mitigating that particular risk. So this bottom section right here is a snapshot from the RAT itself. It says individual declined referral to a qualified health care professional. That first box in blue is when the team confirms, you know what, there's enough supports in place right now that we think it mitigates the risk sufficiently. And if you think it doesn't mitigate the risk currently, then you want to check other, and we're working with OIH to do some modifications to the RAT to enable you to wrap text in this other box, so that if you do decide that you want to remove throw rugs, maybe increase the person's reminders to slow down when they're eating meals, as in the example here, that you'll be able to put a sentence or two in that section to say, this is what we're going to modify, this is where it's going to be in the plan, we're going to monitor and follow agency procedures for emergencies as well. So a little bit more space for you to address those risks within the scope of your practice. All right. On the last slide here, just remember, if a potential risk is identified, you want to have it confirmed by a qualified professional in order to include clinical supports in the ISP. If the person declines consultation, then you must confirm that enough support is in place with existing health protocols, medications, etc., to mitigate that risk. And you also want to make sure that if it's not, that you are doing what you can to mitigate, monitor, and respond to any identified potential risk as well. Finally, just remember, teams must address all health and safety needs for continued access to DD waiver services. So if you find yourself in a position where you feel the person is declining consultation and you're being creative and trying to support that and you're putting things in place to mitigate the risk, if health and safety continues to be a concern, you certainly want to bring the team together and look at whether or not waiver services can in fact meet that person's needs. So that is still sort of the bottom line with waiver, that health and safety needs to be assured. All right, so that's all I have for you today. Thank you.